Alright, so it's about that time. This is the last panel of the day, so hopefully if things go a little long, it shouldn't be a problem, but I'm going to try to keep it under time. Anybody who's gone to my sessions before knows I tend to shoot things pretty fast and furious, so we'll see. Anyway, this is the end of the first day of G-Fest. Who is absolutely sick of giant monster fans at this point? Okay, I think we're safe. This panel is going to be just about that, basically. It's going to be about people who are fans of Kaiju and Tokusatsu. So today we're going to talk about the history of Japanese fan culture. We're going to just talk about the evolution of it over time. It's sort of a unique thing in terms of global scale, but there's definitely overlap with other cultural phenomena. We're going to talk a lot about media, specifically that deals with fan culture of these things. So we're going to go over characters that are otaku. We'll go over what that means. And as a warning, there are spoilers on many things, and it's sort of unavoidable. So I'll maybe throw out something and say, be warned if people are concerned about that. This is a quick overall. There's plenty of stuff that deals with Western fan, monsters and heroes. That fandom is its own thing. We're not going to talk about that because there's too many slides as it is. Also, just to whittle this down a little bit, I'm talking about a very narrow definition of fandom. So a lot of people would say that religion is a form of fandom, and that's a messy argument I don't necessarily want to get into. But basically, I don't think of the characters that we're talking about here as thinking of necessarily having a moral compulsion to be the fans that they are. It might be something that's cultural, but it's not necessarily something that's an ethical imperative. Now, likewise, they're not going to be activists. Activism is also a little different from fandom because these are people that they might like something that they might not even like it. They might just defend it, and that's not necessarily what we're talking about here either. We're talking about very typical, stereotypical geek stuff. And lastly, yeah, we get these guys a lot who are like, I really love King Kong because King Kong will make me a lot of money, and that is also not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who just love King Kong because King Kong is the best. So there's that question, why would somebody want to watch something about nerds, geeks, otaku, etc.? And there are a lot of reasons for this. First of all, there's going to be a built-in audience. If you're going to make a show about people who are ice skaters, you don't necessarily know that ice skaters are going to watch it. If you're going to make a show about people who watch anime, you know that people who watch anime will watch it. So that's a given right out the get-go. Secondly, it's free advertising, either for an existing franchise. This is hypothetical, but let's say you came up with a show that was all about how Trekkies are just so quirky and cool. Then you can celebrate all the things that Star Trek has to go with it. Similarly, you can use it as a testing bed of like, hey, here's these characters that watch this fictitious show within the series, and then if the show gets really big, you can make a spin-off that is just a show within the show. That's happened. You get strong personalities, which are entertaining to watch. There's a quote, every character is defined by their desires, and nobody has more desires that are as pronounced as big nerds. And finally, there's that write what you know mantra. And a lot of the people who get into filmmaking got into it because they really like film. So they're going to write about people who are really into film, and it gives that sense of authenticity from that perspective. So within Japanese pop culture, there's all of these cycles where one thing comes up and is very, very popular for a short period of time. And what we're really focusing on are the giant monsters, the Kaiju. That was really huge in the 1960s. And basically the stuff that has come out since then has been throwbacks to that. Similarly, there was a second Kaiju boom in the 1970s. It's known as the Henshin boom, which is, got to do with transforming superheroes. And we're going to be talking basically about both of those today. Now, after World War II, that's when you get the sort of first formation of this fan culture, and it starts, of course, with little kids because it's very generational. And all of this media comes out for kids, specifically for boys, and it gets absorbed, and suddenly there's this sort of beginning of a monoculture going on, especially with science fiction stories. And as a result, when you get to the live action special effects adventures, there's these comments of like, why all these 60s things have all of these kids? And like, well, because that was what was popular with kids at the time. These stories, if they appeal to children, it makes sense to put children in it, and voila, that's what you get. Now, are these kids technically fans? That gets into a complicated question. There's this term Kenny that gets thrown around for the various children that are in the Gamera franchise. This is because when the first Gamera was brought over, they redubbed it so that Toshio's name was changed to Kenny, and then it just sort of got cycled around as a mantra, thanks largely to Mystery Science Theater, but just through dubbed VHS copies as well. So these kids, they seem to be fans of Gamera, but their fandom is reciprocated. Gamera is the friend to children. Gamera helps them out. They are rooting for something that is in their best interest, not just purely for the love of Gamera. And they're not fans of giant monsters as a whole. They just seem to really like Gamera, and Gamera likes them. So it really is more like a friendship than a fan sort of connection there. But not all of them are like that. I mean, if we think about the boy in the yellow hat, I think we all know who we're talking about. Yes, the boy from Oshima's movie Boy. No, I'm just kidding. This movie does feature a little boy who dreams about monsters, and he lives in a terrible society and lives a rough life. And it came out the same year as the actual movie that we're talking about. So Ichiro in All Monsters Attack, he basically lives in the slums, and he spends his time dreaming about going and visiting Monster Island and hanging out with Minilla and seeing all of the monsters, and he's definitely he's typical fan material. And this is always an interesting entry in the Godzilla series because it's not clear. It seems like Godzilla doesn't actually exist in this movie. It's just all the figments of a child. So is it technically a Godzilla movie? That's a big debate. But there's already 2 panels about this movie this weekend, so I don't know if we need to go over too much of it. I will say that one of the fun Easter eggs or pop culture resonances of this is in the comic series Kaiju Max, which is coming out from Oni Press today. This is basically like a prison drama where Monster Island is a prison and all the monsters are the inmates. There is this character, Little Boy, who, the son of sort of the top mobster monster, has this little child that speaks to him, and it's not clear if he has like schizophrenia or something. Because, like, basically he's the only one that hears this little child, and the kid tells him to do things, and it's pretty great.
I love the reversal.
Yes. I mean, there's a very similar character in Space Warriors 2000. Space Warriors 2000 is terrible, though, so don't watch it. It's another little kid who fantasizes about going off and being in a stolen Thai Ultraman movie. So those were fantastic examples, but what about in the universe? And this is where we get to our probably biggest example in the Godzilla franchise is Ken, another Kenny, in Godzilla vs. Hedorah. So this is a kid that lives in a world with giant monsters, but he still has all of these giant monster figures, and people always, that's an area for discussion. It's really fascinating. And people say, oh, this is really inappropriate, but I can think of lots of kids that have dangerous animals as stuffed toys, teddy bears or, stuffed sharks. And I mean, there's probably kids that watch movies about serial killers on Netflix that are based on reality. So, it's something that's a little bit, it seems odd at first, but not necessarily, especially given the weird things that happened in the 70s with the Godzilla franchise anyway. Speaking with weird things in this kid's fandom, did you notice that he also has Ultraman toys? Which,
really?
Yeah, I mean, that's a little weird, It's like, are we going to wind up with one of these paradoxes where, which thing is a thing within the other thing? And, I mean, as long as the Ultraman franchise doesn't have toys of... Oh, wait. Yeah, this is an episode actually directed by Ishiro Honda, so... and then this is just a little scene where Jiro is one of the main kids. He's shooting a little kaiju diorama with his friends, and I thought, well, that's a fun example of like how you could have like good kids that are just playing together. But then the same series also has this bad kid who, he sets up these dioramas and just fantasizes about having his monster go through and rampage and just destroy everything, and he's running around going roar, roar, and just being a terror. And then of course he actually gets a monster, because that's the way Ultraman works. It's not pretty, but it all works out, and this is not isolated. If you went to the Bandai and Tsuburaya panel that we did earlier, we point out that like this happens a lot where you have like actual monster toys within the thing that they're promoting. With the Ultraman dolls, it makes a little bit more sense because Ultraman's a hero and it inspires people. But sometimes you get the monsters as well. Have another Godzilla kid there. So within these fictional universes, just like in real life, these properties are super popular with the children, to the point that you can make an amusement park just to celebrate them. And then you're like, oh wait, our world doesn't have enough monsters, so we got to go to this Gengo guy and have him dream up other monsters for us. And I love Shukara and Mamagon because it speaks directly to like how crass it could be. Like, yeah, let's have a homework monster and a monster that's like your annoying mom. So that's sort of like the overview of this whole like kaiju fandom in kids media. But eventually kids grow up and their interests change. As we said, the henshin and kaiju booms, they ended, and this is where we get sort of that codified period where those kids have grown up and now they are making their own media, and things start to really change. There is a TV series called Super Dimension Fortress Macross, and ironically that is a show about fandom saving the world, because it's a series where aliens invade and the aliens all get addicted to pop music and decide to hold off their attack. In the series, there's a character that doesn't speak Japanese all that well and uses this archaic term otaku to refer to somebody. It's sort of like saying your noble house or something like that. It doesn't sound entirely natural. However, fans of the series start using it to refer to one another, and then it just balloons into this thing that it doesn't just apply to fans of the series, it applies to fans of anything. And that's basically how this term gets popularized, is through, this niche thing and then balloons. One of the people who worked on Macross was actually Hideaki Anno, the director of Shin Godzilla. He had a studio of fans that basically they started in college. They were making amateur movies. They did Tokusatsu projects and little animated shorts. They eventually became the studio Gainax, this fan type of thing that's really well documented in the TV drama Aoi Hono, or Blue Blazes. I think for a while it was released over here as Blue Fire, but you can't find it anymore. This is based on an autobiographical manga by Kazuhiko Shimamoto, and it's basically set at Osaka University of Arts right on the cusp of 1980. And all of these weirdos that are attending classes together with these strong personalities go on to become major names in the animation industry. The president of Bones, people whose manga you can buy on Amazon.com. The TV series based on it is amazing and hilarious, and I would definitely recommend checking it out, especially because Anno was one of the main characters. And he is this creepy, like, ill-tempered, bad hygiene, like, genius. So he's sort of the main character's rival in the show, because he makes these amazing films, but he just has no people skills. And in the first episode, he does this hilarious short, and the whole class is laughing at it, and he stands up and like, it's not meant to be funny, and he just runs out of the room. It's great. Anno is such a character that this isn't the only series that focuses on him, because his wife also did a manga series called Insufficient Direction, where he's basically it's about like him and in his weird mannerisms, and the more otaku stuff the funnier it gets. They use Gundams as a currency in it. Like, he's like, I'll pay you 3 Gundams if you do my chores today, or things like that. And of course, that's also not the only thing with Gainax as a key, because they also made a short Otaku no Video, and this basically goes through the founding of their studio. So these are 3 different time periods. Blue Blazes is when they were in college, Otaku no Video was when they were getting their studio together, and then Insufficient Direction is after he's a success and a professional. But Daikon Films and Gainax, they weren't the only ones doing this. There were all sorts of groups in the 1980s that were doing their own fan films and fan projects. If Kaiju Gaiden ever comes together, you can hopefully get more information about that there. Fan films aren't the only fan activities. You have fan comics. There's a big comic event that happens biannually, where people come and they sell their own original stories that are not entirely legal. And one of the designers for the Godzilla series, Shinji Nishikawa, he basically got started doing fan comics, and then became a huge name that you see at conventions all over the States. Similar to fan comics, you have fanzines. Everybody here should know about G-Fan, hopefully. Good. So, it would be cool if those people got the respect and they had a TV series about somebody who had a fanzine. Well, they do. And Kaiju Club, it's set in the late 1970s, and it's about one of the particularly notable fanzines, and it's this circle of guys that get together and they put together their zine, and they have personal drama. The main character is trying to hide the fact that he's a nerd and he still likes these children's shows from his significant other, and there's great scenes in it. Like, they all go out to a restaurant and they all talk about, like, oh man, who here remembers the Ultra 7 assassination operation? And the waiters are just like, what are they talking about?
I think they're plotting an actual assassination.
Yes, yeah. Now, an early work that focuses on a superhero fan is Wingman from Masakazu Katsura. This had a long anime series from Toei and was sort of a big hit from Shonen Jump in the 80s. It hasn't really been... It hasn't gotten much of a following in English, but basically the story here is you have a guy that he gets a magical notebook that anything that you put in the notebook happens for real. That never happened at Shonen Jump again. And basically he designs his own superhero, and then he fights these people from an alternate dimension. And another one of my favorite characters that fits this sort of like fan girl stereotype is Noah from Patlabor. This is a series that's basically like a cop drama in a world where there's giant robots. So to stop a bad guy with a giant robot, you need a good guy with a giant robot. So the police all have these mechs, and your main character is basically a gearhead, but she's like really into her giant robot. She's like, the opening theme is like her singing a love song about how great it is to go out on the town with her giant robot, and it's pretty delightful. There's some kaiju centric episodes that I suggest checking out if you ever want to go with Patlabor. However, even at this point, there's a lot of stigma attached to this weird sort of culture, this fandom, and it gets worse. Basically, there's a nasty serial killer case in the late 1980s where basically you have this guy that has a huge collection of horror and anime videos, and because of this, a lot of people, the first time hearing the word otaku, it comes from this case, and unfortunately it gets this really, really, like, it didn't have a good connotation before, now it's really bad. A lot of Japanese people to this day, if you say you're an otaku, they'll like look at you weird and be like, no, and they prefer subtler terms like maniac. So and there's also, at the same time, the economic bubble is bursting. A lot of people are sort of aimless, and instead of going out and getting jobs, they just stay home and watch videos and things like that. And that also doesn't really play very well in the public perception. So the whole combination, like, there's not a good mental image of a lot of nerdy things in the States. Look at Big Bang Theory, there's a lot of like, ooh, that's pretty cringeworthy, but you don't get that really like vile hatred as often in the States as you did in Japan in that time period. And you can see examples in media that sort of go along these lines. Takashi Toto in Gridman, the original Gridman, he's basically what we would call an incel. He's this guy that is like, I am so brilliant and so wonderful, and nobody respects me, and I tried to talk to somebody, and then they didn't listen, so I'm going to put a monster on the internet that's going to turn all the water into sulfuric acid. And that's what he does. And he's completely a self-sabotaging character. He just, yeah.
Would his American counterpart qualify as that?
Yeah, Malcolm Frank. I guess. I mean, it's basically a one-to-one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's more of an Americanized version. I'm
Yeah.
more familiar with the Americanized version than this one.
Yeah, so, I mean, he's basically a guy that goes home, he's by himself on the computer all the time, thinking about how everybody hates him, in fact, nobody actually cares. And he has this, like, inferiority complex that drives him to create monsters, and then Gridman has to go fight those monsters. Another very creepy example is this character from an episode of Tekoki Makazuki, where he's part of this Kaiju fan club in college that, you know, they're all like, yeah, the monsters, they're the true rulers of the earth, and they need to take over, and, you know, thank God we never heard that narrative in a recent 2019 movie, but he goes a step further with it because he kidnaps one of the main heroines of the series and drags her back to his apartment where he has, like, photographs of her all over the wall, and it's not a good look, guy. We also have The Friend from the series 20th Century Boys, which is a fantastic manga by Naoki Urasawa. But basically, this is a series that starts in the 1960s and 1970s with a group of kids growing up, and they think, you know, what if this happened? What if a giant robot appeared and attacked the city? And then they're just playing these games as children. And then around the turn of the century, they're all like middle-aged adults, and everything that they thought about as kids starts happening for real. Like, there's a giant robot that appears, the airport gets blown up, there's an outbreak of a deadly virus, and they're like, one of our friends is doing this, which one is it? And it's just this crazy game of cat and mouse to try to figure out who the mastermind behind all these terrible events are. But because it's all like a doomsday scenario concocted by a child, you get these weird things like his you know, Gestapo are basically dressed like the Science Patrol, you know, things like that, where it's just like pop culture seeping in. An American example, we have Endo from Project Nemesis. His whole deal is that he loves kaiju so much that he's going to become a hitman to get his way up in the government so that he can basically become a kaiju or become friends with a kaiju. That's a comic series that Matt Frank worked on, and there's a whole series of novels behind it. Aizen from the recent concluded Ultraman Rube series. That's another really interesting character because he is not a kaiju fan, he's an Ultraman fan, but he doesn't think that the new generation of Ultramen are doing it good enough. So he basically steals the powers to become an Ultraman. He becomes Ultraman Orb Dark Noir Black Schwartz, and he goes around defeating the original Ultramen and causing havoc in the city just to show off, like, hey, look at how much better I am than these other guys. This is the way Ultraman needs to be. I'll bring up the Pokemaniacs from Pokemon. You know, they're basically random encounter villains, so they don't have a whole lot of personality. I just like the fact that they dress in monster suits, and then also they dress their monsters up in monster suits. So. And then the worst villain of all is this kid from Godzilla Final Wars. I hate that kid. He's throwing his vinyls into the fire. It's not a good look, man.
And it was a camera.
Yes.
That he threw into.
Yeah. So, one movie I think would be of appeal to some people here is the movie Blister. It's about toy collecting. It's sort of made in a period where otaku were not necessarily in good graces, but it's very much a punk underground sort of movie anyway. It's about an action figure collection. The main character is looking for this action figure. Turns out in the end of the movie it's a sci-fi movie because 100 years from the future there's a doomsday device that can only be deactivated when the main character uses the sound effect from this one particular action figure to deactivate it. It's like a password, so it's a hoot. But for anyone who's like gone way too far looking for that one piece of their collection. Blister, check it out. Now, there was a bit of a reformation that happened in the 2000s in terms of public perception, and I think a lot of this has to do with the Train Man incident. And basically what happened was there was a series of posts anonymously made on the internet about a guy who claimed that he had protected a woman on the train from a molester, and she decided that she would be okay with dating him, and he was a hopeless geek with no social skills and had no idea what to do, and he didn't want her to find out. And basically the entire internet came together and they're like, okay, we're going to help this dude. So there's this huge thread that gained a lot of popularity of people like, well, what's going on with the Train Man? How's his life going? Is he and that woman, are they still together? What can I tell him about hair care products that'll make him go better on his date today? This became such a hit that there was a movie adaptation, there was a novel adaptation, there was a television adaptation, there were multiple manga adaptations. It became sort of a piece of modern mythology. And it sort of turned around a lot of cultural perceptions where, like, it's not so much like, ooh, this is this disgusting loser guy, but sort of like this underdog that people wanted to root for. And it's interesting because if you watch any of the adaptations, you can still see all of the stigma that he faces for his hobbies. And that's something that hasn't entirely gone away. Like, there's a recent series, Tokusatsu Gagaga. This is a manga about, and this is interesting because it's a female fan who's into Super Sentai sort of series. And she's always being told, oh, this is for boys, this is for children, you shouldn't like this thing. So it's still like echoes of this same sort of thing that we were seeing 15 years ago. But again, the series itself portrays her in a very sympathetic light. And it's all about her coming to terms with herself, making other friends who are into the same things, convincing her judgmental coworkers, her judgmental mother to maybe accept her lifestyle, things like that. Yep.
I just want to comment because of your earlier statement about not conflating fandom with religion. Tokusatsu Gagaga does that explicitly. Conflates religion and fandom. Yeah. I mean, they do this whole thing in it where, you know, the ichthys in ancient Christianity, where like one person draws one half of the fish and the other person draws the other half of the fish, and that's how you know that they're both Christians. They do the same thing, except it's with keychains. So she has like a little keychain with a character that she rides with it on the train. So if she sees somebody else with the keychain, they don't have to say anything. And they're both like, hey, I know what you like. And yep.
Is there? There's a little bit of this in the States, but is there kind of almost a double stigma like there's over here with geek girls because they're?
We'll get to that. Yeah. Just continuing down some of the other positive examples. We talked about Mikazuki earlier, how it had that sort of like terrible, creepy fan guy, but you know, one of the main robot pilots in the show, she watches a show religiously, and she's basically portrayed as being good for it. And you know, this was one of those cases also where the show within the show was popular enough that they made a little short movie for it. It goes even farther when you get into Ultraman Geed, where the main character was inspired by this superhero that he watched as a child, and now he learned how to become a superhero, how to become the actual Ultraman Geed by watching this TV show, and now his whole sense of heroism is based on this fabricated entertainment. So that works well. It doesn't work as well with Utsumi in SSSS Gridman. He's a huge fan of the Ultraman series, and he helps out his friends, but he gives them terrible advice because he interprets everything that's going on in this anime series based on Gridman based on the lens of the Ultra series. So he's like, this is probably an alien invasion. It's not an alien invasion. You know, things like that where he, you know, is a little bit off his rocker there. He doesn't contribute things on that way, but he's great for moral support. SSSS Gridman is a fantastic show, by the way, so we'll get back to it in a little bit. Ultraman has a lot of support characters lately, and they fit this archetype exactly, and I think it really helps out in getting those long-term fans to see somebody who recognizes themselves within the show. particularly Tepe in Ultraman Mabius. He's the ultra monster expert, so whenever a monster appears, he can be like, alright, that is Birdon, he uses fire breath, look out for his pecking attack, and here is stats, his height, his weight, and everything, and then the defense team knows that they can use that to their advantage. Yeah, a similar deal with the later characters that came on, Koichi and Rui. Daichi is actually an Ultraman, and Rui we'll get back to in a little bit because she's a character. Similarly, we've got Guy and Gokaiger. Gokaiger is an anniversary series for Super Sentai, so the main characters have the powers to turn into all of the previous Rangers. And as a result, the 6th Ranger is this guy who comes in and he knows all about the previous one, so he can tell them exactly what they need to know, how to use their powers to the best extent of their abilities, and get support for the things that they need to from the previous generation. So he recognizes the characters, he knows all about what they can do, what they can't do, and he's a handful that way, but also he's just fantastically entertaining to just like every time a new Ranger comes on that's from a previous series, he geeks out like the audience would geek out. He's like, oh my god, can't believe I meet you, senpai! And it's fantastic. So this isn't entirely like a Japanese thing. There's some American characters that sort of fit into this mold as well. Newt from Pacific Rim is just, a fantastic like fanboy. He's called like a kaiju groupie, and he still uses his knowledge to help fight monsters, but he's definitely a fan of the monsters for the monsters' sake. At least until later. So yeah, he turns into a bit of a bad guy towards the end, but that's another story. Another American example is Isabel from the series Fire Breather, or the movie Fire Breather. This was a movie on Cartoon Network based on an Image comic. And basically, this character was in the comics, but she wasn't a fan in the comics. When she was introduced in the movie, she's like, oh, I love Kaiju, and she knows all about the various Kaiju. The main character in Fire Breather is half Kaiju, and she finds out about it, and then she falls in love with him, and I'm not sure if that's the order that it comes in or what the implications are there. But that gets into another trend that we're seeing a whole lot lately, and this is the boom of female otaku in media. So this is something that has been popular for both men and women, and it makes sense because women can be like, okay, I see somebody who represents myself, my own experience in it, and for men they can be like, man, this girl has like all of the same interests that I do, and she doesn't have a boyfriend. So a couple of examples of that. We have Hanji from Attack on Titan. This character was not intended to be female initially. It was just drawn rather androgynously, and the mangaka didn't have a specific idea in mind of this is a man or a woman. However, with the anime and then with the live-action movie, played by Satomi Ishihara, which, if you've seen Shin Godzilla, she's definitely a woman. So they've made the character female, and it's resulted in an increase in the character's popularity. Another example, we've got this manga Kaiju no Ie, or Monster House, and it's basically about a guy that he lends his house out to be used in the filming of a movie, and one girl is just living there entirely because she's obsessed with monsters and just wants to be a part of the movie process. This hasn't been translated or anything, so you can maybe find it in Japanese. Another manga that hasn't really gotten a translation, and the title is unfortunately sort of a monster in and of itself, is Ini Kaisuru Kotonaku Jujutsu Shitahibi, and it's like the Kai and the Ju within that are written with the characters for monster, so it's a pun, but basically the manga title means like productive days without worry. And it's about two high school girls. One of them is super into kaiju stuff, and then there's her friend that just sort of tags along and deals with all of the crazy fantasies that her friend has. And it's just great to see, the delinquent and the nerd girl getting along, and then the nerd girl going off on all these tangents about like, well, this was something that happened in Gamera too, and so on and so forth. Another girl like this is Yayoi in Smile Pretty Cure. You know this as Glitter Force on Netflix. I would advise against watching the Netflix version, but yeah, she's just all about the robots and, you know, making Ultraman poses, and she's an actual superhero again who's obsessed with superhero stuff. Seven Cube is a manga that is set at a high school that's themed around Ultra 7, which is just the craziest concept, but I don't know a whole lot about it. I haven't actually tracked it down, but I do know that their school uniforms within the series are based on the Ultra Garrisons, and it's pretty wild that this is, the media is that broad that we have something that focuses just on this. Cheer Fruits is a series about a group of local heroines. So basically, it's an acting troupe. So this is something that appeals to both people who like superheroes, but also like, you know, theater productions. You know, in this, they put on a stage show basically to amuse a child, and they accidentally do some damage to the property, and then because student councils have more power than government or police in Japanese media, the student council says, okay, we'll keep you out of legal trouble as long as you do this weekly stage show for all of the people in our city, and it sort of drum up tourism. And it's a lot of fun. You know, they call out tropes all of the time and sort of go through all of the rigmarole. There's a whole episode that's about them getting a cease and desist for copyright reasons, for example. And then a fantastic character in a fantastic show, SSSS.Gridman. This is potentially spoilery, so, you know, caveat. Akane is basically an update on the previous character that we mentioned from the original Gridman, where she sends out monsters on a weekly basis to go attack the town and things like that. However, her persona in public is very different from in private. In public, she's, you know, the most popular girl in the school. Everybody loves her. They are always inviting her to things, and she's just universally beloved, and she's so happy and energetic. And then she gets home, and she's just surrounded by bags of trash and figurine cases. So you can see that there's all of these bags of trash in that scene there, just to signify that she's really just a shut-in at heart. And it gets interesting as you get further into the series. You learn more and more about this character. But this is really a world that she has made for herself. So this is something that she sort of aspires to be, as opposed to entirely being something that's foisted upon her, whether it's something that she feels that it is her responsibility or not. So I'll leave it a little bit vague, because I could do a whole panel sort of talking about this character and her interactions with other characters and her identity within the show, and it gets really interesting. So one of the tropes that we see come up that's specifically to these female fans is that they seem to get really into romantic things, and this is where you get that sort of weird trope that a lot of them seem to be into monsters in like a non-platonic way. So we talked about Rui in Ultraman before, and she's always talking about how she wants to go on a date with such and such monster or something like that. And I don't really know what to make about this. I just calling it out that it seems to be pretty common. I think it might be a stereotype, but I mean, it's common with works written by men and by women. So now, we were talking about the fake fangirl earlier, right? So this is something that has come up in the recent Ultraman anime, and this is not part of the original manga. That you have this character, Rena, who is a pop idol who bases her whole act around Ultraman, and in the anime you find out, oh, she doesn't actually like Ultraman, she's just doing it like for promotional purposes. So this is something that we see come up in culture a lot, that, you know, like, we've gone full circle to the point where, like, oh, you're just faking this geek cred to gain popularity, which is completely an inversion from where we were in the 1980s. So we talked about a lot of the tropes. So I think the most interesting one that's happened most recently is this postmodern thing where characters sort of break the fourth wall, and the nature of the text and the genre interacts with the material of the text. So the plot is relatively fluid. So, as an example of that, in the Ultraman Gaia movie, he goes to a parallel universe where Ultraman Gaia is a TV series, and everybody recognizes him as the star of Ultraman Gaia. He can go to an Ultraman store. Things like that. They get a little bit wibbly-wobbly. The movie Zebraman. This is the original movie. There is a sequel to it. The sequel doesn't really deal with these same themes. It's sort of about a schlubby, middle-aged father who's he grew up watching a TV series, and now he dresses up as the main character and goes out and fights crime at night. Except it turns out that the TV series was sort of like a prophecy from the future, so he actually gains superpowers and becomes the main character of the TV series. It's good stuff. Tanzaburo Tojima wants to be a Kamen Rider. This is a recent manga series. You can actually read it online for free in Japanese on its official website, but it's about a guy that just really wants to be a Kamen Rider, and one day he's in a store and there's a bank robbery and he's like, Shocker is attacking, and he just puts on a mask and starts kicking dudes. And there are other characters who see that, like, people film it and put it on YouTube, and other people see it and they're like, yeah, I want to do that, and then you get the whole like Kamen Rider universe starts to manifest within the span of this show or manga. It's a very similar premise to Samurai Flamenco, which is absolutely amazing. This is a show where the entire show just changes on a dime sporadically. There's an American movie, Kick-Ass, based on a comic book that came out a few years ago, where it's about a guy that he reads superhero comics and he just really wants to be a superhero, and he goes out and starts fighting crime, and the police are like, dude, what are you doing? This is basically the premise of this show for about 7 episodes. And then, a spoiler, around the 7th episode, he's fighting some crack dealers, and one of them just suddenly decides, all right, now it's time to reveal my true form, and he turns into a giant gorilla with a guillotine in his stomach, and then it becomes like an actual Japanese superhero show where he's fighting monsters. And then you go a couple more episodes, and then all of a sudden he's got this whole team, and they have a giant robot, and you're like, what is going on? and that is Samurai Flamenco. It is a wild ride.
Much less jaded than Kick-Ass.
Yes. Another series that sort of plays with the Super Sentai tropes is Akiba Ranger. It's got 2 seasons. The first is a little bit stronger than the second one, and this just follows a bunch of Super Sentai fans who defend Akihabara. Akihabara is sort of like the mecca of otaku stuff within Japan. It's a shopping district where you have a whole lot of anime goods and tokusatsu goods and all of those sorts of things. So they don't defend the world, they just defend one district, maybe. Because as you see when you're going through the show, maybe these characters are maybe it's all in their heads, maybe they're doing it for real. It plays with a lot of fun tropes, and if you watch any Super Sentai at all, the more it goes. Like in the first episode, the main villain is like, I'll leave it to you, and then he's like, that was the line I was waiting for. That means I can defeat the bad guy now. Things like that. But within this, it really plays up, the otaku stuff with the Super Sentai stuff. So like they have a giant robot, but their giant robot is a car that transforms, and it's a car that has these really gaudy, ugly, like anime girl images on the side. Like the main character has a power-up form, but his power-up form is basically an anime girl that's hugging him. I don't know if you can make that out there.
I was wondering if that was another character.
Yeah, so it's things like that make it a lot of fun. And then the ending of the series is basically a giant reference to the whole Chayo legal battle. So it's good stuff. Another one that I like a lot, Outer Man. You can now watch this on Toku. This was actually made as an homage to the 50th anniversary of Ultraman, and the idea here is that there's the evil invading aliens that look like Ultraman, and the evil invading aliens have been conditioning society by putting out TV shows about how good these saviors are. And then you have these aliens that look like Baltan that are actually the good guys, but because people have been watching this show, they're like, oh, that evil alien, like. But no, the Baltan is the good guy here, and the Ultraman is the bad guy.
That is genius.
It's great.
I must see this now.
Another one of my favorites is this manga series, Heroes Are Extinct. It's basically It's about an evil alien invasion force. They come to Earth. The main character is this alien general. He's been watching Super Sentai shows his whole life. He's like, I want to go to Earth. I want to fight the great heroes. This is going to be a glorious battle. And he gets there and he finds out it's only on TV. And he snaps. And he abducts 5 humans. And he's like, I'm going to give you powers, so you will fight against me every single week. And it'll be the challenge I've always dreamed of.
It's Galaxy Quest on steroids.
It is. Yeah, Ready Player One. This is a very popular novel. It was made into a movie by Steven Spielberg recently, and this is another one where the main character is this huge nerd. His knowledge of pop culture helps him on his quest to gain the keys to a cyber kingdom. Basically, it's all within virtual reality, and there's all of these properties that come together. A lot of Godzilla fans know this because Mechagodzilla shows up in the climax. In the novel, it gets way crazier. You have the giant robot from Spider-Man, the Japanese Spider-Man. You have the main character turns into Ultraman, and various other things are called out. And I would recommend the novel probably ahead of the movie. It's a hoot.
I'm the reverse.
Oh.
I'm not a fan of the book.
As an example of foreign fans in Japanese media, I just thought that this was a fun one. There's a short story by Naoki Urasawa called Kaiju Okaku, where basically you have this fanboy who comes to Japan because monsters are in Japan, and then he becomes a hero to save the Japanese people, and he gets a giant statue erected of himself. Oops. Yeah, you can see.
I feel so
So anyway, there are a gazillion other examples that we could go through of characters that are that like things within media, or that they get inspired by them. I've got a whole batch of them here, but figure we could probably.
I just read Giant Killer, actually.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's good. And then there are other series that deal with geeky things but aren't necessarily related to giant monsters.
I was going to mention High Score Girl.
Yeah, yeah, High Score Girl is fantastic. That's another one you can watch on Netflix. But it's about video games. It's not about superheroes and monsters. But on that note, any questions or discussion that we want to go for? Yo.
Would you consider the South Park episode where it becomes an anime? Would that fit into this category?
Yeah, I could see that. You know, where was that the Fun with Weapons?
Yes, the Fun with Weapons.
Yes.
I'm trying to remember because when you were talking about Outer Man, what is the name of that Sentai parody short film by like Tetsuya? It's like Rolling Thunder or something. Do you know what I'm talking about, Kevin? Because it's the exact same premise that you were describing. Or not Outer Man. The Heroes Are Extinct.
Oh.
It's the exact same premise, but reversed. Where it's this guy, and these people start showing up and harassing him, telling him that they have to be his villain. And it's like a Sentai team.
Was that Dynapon?
No. I'm gonna find it.
Okay.
I just thought you might know off the top of your head.
Yeah, not off the top of my head. No. Well, I know I went through a lot of things very quickly there, and I try to record everything and put it up online later, so this will be on YouTube for consumption. I've got some copies of my book here if anyone wants to flip through that or talk about other things. With that said, I think we can adjourn our first day of G-Fest panels.